Hello, this is Helen Thomas and the CDFM study group. I'm going to be continuing review of CDFM Module 4, Competency 8, Test and Evaluation. So now you have your acquisition program online. You have to have a portion of that process being test and evaluation. So there's different types. There's developmental tests and evaluation. There's operational tests and evaluation and live fire tests and evaluation. So we're going to look at each one of those. On page 482, it goes into the developmental tests. So we're in these early on in the acquisition process. We're developing the item, we're testing it to see its effectiveness, survivability, suitability. Is it doing what we want it to do? So the DT and E is the area where you will identify any deficiencies in that program. So on the bottom of page 482, it talks about, you have 3 bullets there, the first one being the DT and E. But at the top of page 483, it talks about the last sentence. The developmental test and evaluation should increase the robust system level and system of systems level testing and evaluation. Why? To ensure that the system has matured to the point that it can meet the initial operational test and evaluation. So early on, for you to be able to identify any deficiencies, issues with that capability that we selected, you will do that in the DT and E. Also, it says the robust DT and E reduces technical risk and increases the probability of a successful. So that tells you developmental test and evaluation comes first, and it ensures a successful operational test and evaluation. Doing early DT&E tests, responsibility may fall into the prime contractor who will focus testing on technical contract specification. So think about it. Now we're in the stage where, let's say we have a prototype. Contractor has built the prototype, which means the responsibility to test and evaluate that system will be on that contractor. But again, as a program manager, you still need to be abreast or understanding what's going on with that program. All right, on page 484, it goes into modeling and simulation. Remember, modeling and simulation occurs throughout this entire acquisition process. So modeling and simulation, the second to last paragraph on page 4, is integral to and inseparable from the test and evaluation in support of the acquisition process. So just remember, modeling, simulation, testing occurs throughout the whole acquisition process. All modeling and simulation used in test and evaluation must be accredited by the intended user, program manager. So, which means, yes, the contractor may be the one doing the testing and evaluation, but the program manager has to validate. So think of a contracting officer representative. Accreditation can only be achieved through a robust verification, validation, and accreditation process. Therefore, the intended use of modeling and simulation should be identified early on in the process and made available to the support development of that validation and accreditation process. So all modeling and simulation, even though it's controlled by the prime contractor, must be accredited by the program manager. On page 485, it goes into some procedures when it deals with the operational tests and evaluations, so the OT&E. As mentioned earlier, OT&E is conducted to determine the operational suitability and survivability. So developmental test and evaluation The purpose of that is to identify and eliminate any deficiencies, any issues, any risk that we can mitigate so that when we get to the operational test and evaluation, the purpose of it is to determine the operational capabilities, the operational effectiveness of that system, suitability and survivability. So we want to ensure that that equipment, that aircraft is doing exactly in the operational field what it's supposed to do. All right, so I'm going to page 486. Evaluation of test adequacy. The operational test and evaluation adequacy encompasses both test planning and test execution. And so you have a list, was it, a few bullets there. You look at realistic combat conditions, that you're going to put it in the operational combat condition, realistic product representative system for initial operational test and evaluation, adequate resources, and typical users. So when you're thinking about putting it in the operational, let's say we only have a limited amount of prototypes out there. As a program manager, the program manager has your responsibility. If when you put it in operation and it's not performing according to the standards in which was established in the beginning of this acquisition process, whether it's a hairline crack, whether it's a piece of the puzzle that's missing, once that program manager identifies ethically, he has to stop production and correct that issue before they move on in that process. The third test and evaluation is on page 488. Live fire test and evaluation. So now we're putting those systems in a live scenario, in a live, so just think of a live fire operation where you are actually training with that equipment the way that it's realistically meant to do. So it's a couple of things on page 489. Covered system. We talked about this earlier. Covered system is the DoD term that is intended to include all categories of systems of programs required. So all the systems that require live fire test and evaluation are called covered system. It means that the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation acting for the SecDef has determined to be a major system within the meaning of that term in 10 U.S. Code 2302. And a couple of bullets there: user occupied and designed, conventional use munitions, missile, conventional munitions program for which more than 1 million rounds are planned to be used, or modification to a covered system that is likely to affect significantly the survivability or lethality of that system. So when you talk about live fire, covered system are those systems that requires live fire test and evaluation based on those categories. On page 489, where he talks about U.S. Code 2366, personnel survivability. If it's like the new MRAP, up armored Humvee, and we want to make sure that when we tested those, that our personnel are surviving. We don't want to develop an aircraft, develop a new vehicle, and then, okay, when you test them, our people are dying. It makes sense to continue. That means we need to make some changes. So the ability of that, this live fire testing is to identify if you have, what are your ratio of personnel survivability. On page 4810, you have, it talks about test and evaluation strategy, the test, and later on it should mention the temp. So what you need to know, second bullet, milestone A is where you have a decision for the test and evaluation strategy. The test addresses the modeling and simulation, including identifying and managing associated risk early on. So Modeling and simulation, test and evaluation occurs throughout the entire acquisition process. TES, test evaluation strategy, occurs at milestone A. Further down, it talks about the TEMP, test evaluation master plan. The TEMP is now acquired at milestone B. So the same test and evaluation, just a different name. Now at milestone B is called a TEMP, test evaluation master plan. Okay, what else? We have the role of the test and evaluation after milestone C on page 11 and during the LRIP, low rate initial production. Remember, that's the lowest quantity that we're going to produce initially in milestone C. That's on page 11. All right, let's see. Chapter 8.2, page 4A13 goes into test and evaluation planning and management oversight. Let's go to page 14. Let's see the bullet up here. The test describes the concept for test and evaluation throughout the life cycle. So everything you're projecting. All right, so on page 4A14, it continues with some more information on the test and evaluation strategy. Remember, prior to getting to milestone A, the draft test would have already been submitted, right? So let's see what it says. Test describes the concept for test and evaluation throughout the program. The test is submitted to the OSD for approval, which is the USD ATNL, prior to milestone A, and then your test evaluation strategy eventually evolves into the test evaluation master plan in milestone B. The last sentence on the bottom of page 14 says, its development establishes an early consensus between the test and evaluation working integrated product team members. So remember, in every aspect of this acquisition process, there's we call it WIPIT, working integrated product team, that's in charge of that, monitoring that process. We don't want to make sure everyone is in consensus of what's supposed to happen. On the bottom of page 17, it talks about test approval process, and it kind of just repeats what we've already discussed. For all OSD test and evaluation oversight, you list your program manager. The program manager works with the WIPIT, integrated product team. They provide and submit it to DoD component, and the DoD representative that they submitted to is the Milestone Decision Authority, which is the USD ATNL for ACAT 1 program, 1 Delta. The test to OSD for staffing and approval prior to milestone A, because we want it to be approved by the time we get milestone A. Something important at the top of page 18, when is the test submitted? The test, and also I would tell you the temp is the same thing, 45 days prior to the milestone A, and I think later on it also says prior to the OIPT for that milestone, the overarching integrated product team. But I think in the section 9, you will have to know that. But 45 days before module milestone A is when you submit the test. Let's see what else. Okay. Page 15, 16. Let's go to page 19 at the top is where this part is talking about the temp when it evolves into the test evaluation master plan using an evolutionary acquisition strategy. The temp must also be consistent with the time phase statement of desired capabilities in the capabilities development document and the capability production document. So let's talk about the capability development, CDD and CPD. Remember, initial capabilities document was created by JROC. Later on, JROC also updates that ICD and it becomes the capability development document. Now we we pick the solution, now we need to develop it. He is at a guideline, and then eventually that document will evolve into a capability production document. The third bullet on page 19 gives you that timeline again. For the temp, the master plan must be submitted 45 days prior to milestone B. All right, so this was a short section. So this was CDFM Module 4, Competency 8, which is test and evaluation. Remember, there are 3 types: developmental test and evaluation, which means early on in the acquisition system, we want to identify any issues with that capability. We do that early on to make sure that when it gets to the operational test and evaluation, that we can have survivability, sustainability, and it meets the operational need. And then for those systems that need to go to live fire test and evaluation, you have covered systems. So covered systems based on the US code would then determine which ones need that live fire test and evaluation. So 45 days prior to milestone A, you submit the test. 45 days prior to milestone B, you submit the temp to the USD ATNL or the milestone decision authority. If you're at the component level, it's a component ATNL. All right, thank you for stopping by. Be sure to subscribe so that you get the updates. This is Helen Thomas and the CDFM Study Group.